Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey guys, back again with the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. Actually had Friday off because they are pouring some concrete for the back entryway at Old Homestead Distillery, which is going to make my life way easier with cleaning barrels for fermenters, getting a tote for spent grain in and out, getting a forklift in and out, etc. Man, working on that big gravel is kind of a pain in the ass, and I am happy to see that gone and done and over with. But it's been a busy week. I haven't had a chance to really do a One Piece at a Time video until today. Going to be a busy few months coming up, just trying to knock out all the things I need to do at Old Homestead as well as here at the house, plus working on the Distiller's Almanac and If You Have Ghosts, etc. You know, I keep myself plenty busy without a doubt, for sure. So, quick little update. So, we had a great Fleener peach crop here this year. You know, I obviously posted the video, the stories from the stead about John Fleener and Abraham Fleener and the peaches, and I've talked about the peaches here many times. I was able to get some peaches into some home distillers' hands this year, which I was happy to do. A couple 100 pounds for sure, so there is some Fleener peach brandy rolling around out there in the hills of southern Indiana, without a doubt. Although they are home distillers, not moonshiners. This is not brandy that would be for sale, obviously. So, nonetheless, the Fleener Peach Brandy has actually been nominated for the Slow Food Arc of Taste, and I really hope it gets in there, man. I've been collecting my seed this year, getting those in the ground, to get them stratified over the wintertime, get them to come up. I have intentions of planting a very large peach grove here on my farm in Pekin, Indiana. I've been planting them for years, but this year I want to go all in on getting a bunch of them out there. Also, just trying to keep up with the genetic diversity. I will tell you, I stopped by a couple of the other, both wild stands as well as planted stands of Fleener peaches I know of here in Washington County yesterday to pick up some more seeds and make sure I was really representing the genetic diversity. The trees that are in those spots are old and they're not doing real well. Got me thinking, short of the ones that I've planted on my farm and in various places throughout the county over the years, it might be the last repository for this peach in Washington County. So I plan to keep it going, make sure that everybody has access to it into the future. Low flying helicopter, I guess they're looking for the marijuana, who knows. But anyways, so I'm going to get it out there over time, right? However I can. It may take me a little while, but I'll get them out there. But anyways, moving on from that, let's get into some questions here. So this is from Jeff. Hi again, Alan. On one of your Facebook posts from a few weeks ago, you used the following phrase: working souring into the yeast culture. What does that mean exactly? Is this similar to when you're describing infecting a ferment with lactobacillus, or am I confusing two different concepts? If I'm not confusing two different concepts, can you go into more detail about when and how you do the souring/infecting, pre-pitching the yeast or post-pitching the yeast? What product or organism is used to facilitate the souring/infecting? If there's any kind of pH concerns, benefits of the souring, infecting process, etc., etc. I think I have somewhat of an idea based on things you talked about in the past with regards to yogurt culture and or cheese culture, but I'm just not sure if I understand everything correctly, and this doesn't seem to be a topic that's easily researched online concerning distillation. At least I can't find any info that seems to be consistent and coherent. As always, thanks for your input and info. Yeah, I'm glad to go into that to whatever ability that I can here, and it's a very different thing than what most people do. Now, this is the way that a lot of the sweet mash distillers, a huge stain on my shirt. Look at me looking like a hobo over here. Anyways, going on. A lot of the old sweet mash distillers, this is how they propagated their yeast. They would actually purposefully sour it, and there's several different ways to do it. What I am talking about is using lactobacillus and or cheese cultures, and these are symbiotic cheese cultures. So when I start a new yeast strain that I'm going to propagate myself, after it gets going for 24 to 36 hours, it's about a quarter to two-thirds of the way through fermentation, I will go ahead and add either a cheese culture or potentially lactobacillus from an active yogurt culture. I won't tell you which ones because I've come to realize that the ones that I use are pretty particular, and I am using those at Old Homestead, so you have to play around. Your mileage may vary. But I add those, and those become a part of a twofold symbiotic organism, the yeast and the cheese culture, that will be propagated going forward every single day. So the reason that I do this is because it does drop pH, but it doesn't drop pH immediately. So the yeast gets a chance to get up and going when there's a new sugar source added for the fermentation to happen. That yeast will work about through 2/3 of the sugar, and as it works, it's dropping pH a little bit. But as it works and it gets about 2/3 of the way through, then the cheese culture kicks in, drops pH. So it'll drop pH from, let's say, you started off at 5.5, the yeast works through 2/3, it drops you down to maybe the upper 4s. Then this yeast culture, or this cheese culture hits, and it'll actually drop you into the 3s. The benefits of that are both mouthfeel, as well as protecting the ferment itself, yellow jacket. The way that's protecting the ferment is it's dropping the pH low enough that no other spoilage organisms can get in there. Now, in the actual culture where you are propagating it, as I've talked about propagating yeast before in the past, this lactobacillus becomes a part of that culture that travels alongside that culture. The cool thing is, as the yeast finishes up, it drops out and drops to the bottom of the fermenter. It goes dormant. It's not dead. It's still there. It's completely fine. The cheese culture kicks in, it drops the pH to an extent that it can no longer live within that pH, and then it drops out. You go to restart everything with your fermentation, yeast kicks off first, gets through 2/3 of the fermentation, and then the cheese culture kicks in. They work in symbiosis like that to create a very specific style of distillation. There is this modern term, and I just used it a while ago, called sweet mashing. No one is really sweet mashing. They think they are sweet mashing, is what they think they are doing. So they are adding yeast and allowing the ferment to take off of its own accord without adding any quote-unquote sour mash. Historically, for example, rye whiskey was always sweet mashed, or almost always sweet mashed in Pennsylvania anyways. However, those organisms were almost always used by the distiller in starting up their yeast culture, and where they weren't, they were often operating within wooden open-top fermenters that already had a souring organism in them. There is no such thing as sweet mashing. It doesn't exist. Everybody initially mashes in sweet, short of, when you're adding sour mash in and dropping the pH on purpose to start with. But even then, you're really only dropping it into the 5.5 to maybe 4.8 range, something like that. And 4.8 is pretty low for a lot of the bourbons. Part of fermentation is this souring process that happens naturally. But if you can control it, and you have a very specific organism to control it with, why wouldn't you? So I don't know if that explained it all to you, to some degree anyways, but that's very much so what I am doing. I am propagating two organisms in symbiosis, both for fermentation and for protection from spoilage organisms, basically using a spoilage organism that gives me beneficial results to stop bad spoilage organisms, if that makes any sense. So, all right, I think I got through that. Let me see what else I got here. Okay, so John, I won't say his full name, I'll reach out to him of his own accord too, but John writes and says, I was told to give you a contact after I made a Reddit post and search for a recipe. Back in the 1860s, my family had settled on land and founded a town. Among other things, they operated the first hotel along the newly laid railroad tracks and sold land to make things official. Took drinks of their homemade rye whiskey when a parcel of land was sold. And a town was named Rimmer for both my family's last name, and they distilled rye. To my research, the recipe was lost to history. What I am looking for is a recipe that is similar. The current village of Rimmer, and by extension the town that grew up on top of the hill named Rimmersburg, is currently located in Madison Township, Armstrong County, on the border of Clarion County. So, looking for this recipe, there's a lot of variation in rye recipes. However, it's probably going to be one of 2 to 3 potentialities, more than likely. Because rye was always a very diverse spirit. People don't realize that. And it was regionalized, but people tended to stick to what they knew from where they originally came from. So the first option is it might be an 80-20. So 80% rye, 20% rye malt. Or 80% rye, 10% rye malt, 10% barley malt. Depending on the time period, if this was the 1860s, barley malt's probably becoming fairly easily available at that point in time, so they might have been using some of that barley malt. The other option is that it was something like 100% rye malt. That's a very distinct possibility. The third option would be something more like the George Washington mash bill, which I know here in the Ohio Valley was actually very, very popular. So somewhere in that 60 to 65% rye, and then maybe, you know, let's say 30% corn, and then remainder being malt, just as rough proportions. Those change back and forth. But you would almost really need to take a look at the region you're in and see what was made historically. See if you can find other mash bills or other whiskey brands that were made somewhere in that general region, or the brands that were sold that were incredibly popular. Look in your old newspapers and your newspaper archives, etc., and see if you can find advertisements for other brands that were made, that were sold there locally, and what was selling locally might inform the mash bill that you would use for that particular product. I'm struggling this morning talking, guys. I'm not used to. I got up later than I normally do, and apparently that is a bad thing. Maybe, you know, nappy nap day or something here, but too much to do for all that. Let's see. Okay, so from Keith. I'm the distiller at a small craft distillery in Massachusetts and self-taught. We're located in a very rural part of the state with a lot of local farms we could source grain from, and that would align perfectly with what we're trying to do, but we have an issue with making that possible. We use a hot liquor tank to heat water and then pump it into our mash tun fitted with a false bottom. The mash tun isn't insulated, so we get a good amount of heat loss pretty quick when we first put the water in. Can we mash in cracked corn at a lower temperature by extending the soak time instead of 190 for 90 minutes? Is there a way to tell if we're getting a good breakdown of the cells? We'd much rather buy from a local farmer 20 minutes away than flaked from BSG. Love the channel. Please keep Talking Head videos coming. So 190 for 90 minutes. 90 minutes is pretty long in general, but now if you're using cracked corn because you have to sparge and lauter everything because you have that false bottom, 190 for 90 minutes is probably pretty good. Now, on well-ground corn, you can get away with 60 minutes. You can even get away with 30, 45 minutes, just depending on how efficient and how little heat loss you have. It sounds like you have quite a bit of heat loss. I don't know if you can go for any... I would suspect 60 minutes at 190 should do everything that you need to do, especially if you're using some exogenous enzymes. I see no reason why that shouldn't work. Now, the other way that you could potentially do this is move to 100% malted corn, and then you're not going to have to use as high a temperature, maybe 165 or something like that, for 30 minutes will probably be more than sufficient to do what you want to do, and that would probably be the best way to do it. Now, you're currently using flaked from BSG, which is going to lauter and sparge much easier than even cracked corn's going to. Corn is a pain in the ass to lauter and sparge in high quantities, so bear that in mind. Even if you were to do corn malt, it's still going to get pretty damn sticky and still pretty thick and pretty hard to pull that liquid through. So you're probably going to have to use something like rice hulls or something like that to break it up for sure. On cracked corn, like I said, you might try 60 minutes at 190 instead of 90 minutes. You might be able to pull that off. You know, the same as always, you're going to want to do a starch test on it with iodine just to make sure that you've got the conversion that you want, that you need, etc. I wish I had a better answer for you than what I'm giving you, but that's kind of where you're at. It's something you're going to have to kind of play around with, because the problem is if I do tell you a less amount of time, and even if it does work, you're now using local corn, and you're now using actual corn as opposed to gelatinized corn. What if you get stuck in the mash tun, right? And then I'm going to feel bad about that because I gave you the advice. So it's something that you're just going to have to play around with to some degree, but I certainly think you could probably cut your time down at 190 degrees if you're holding a consistent 190 degrees. A lot of times in a wooden barrel, 53-gallon barrel, when we're mashing at reenactments and stuff like that, we're probably actually dropping temperature to the 180s or so, and then just holding that for about an hour, and that seems to do just fine with the various corns that we have used over the years. But again, I don't have to lauter or sparge that out. So, all right, we're gonna make this a longer video. Let's see what we've got here as far as questions, if there's any more here. I think there are. Give me just 1 second. Okay. So this one is from Jeff. Wait a minute, maybe I've already done this. Yep, already done that one. All right, one more here. Here we go. From John. So hello Alan, I'm a new home distiller with about 10 runs under my belt. I ferment on the grain, but I've always removed the grain before adding to the pot. I have not tried distilling on the grain yet. I have the Vevor 18.5 gallon football still with a false bottom. Also, I have several brew bags. Currently I have a couple of peach and corn mountain brandies fermenting, and I've been considering throwing everything in the still when I run them. What are your thoughts on distilling on the grain with the Vevor with false bottom, and distilling on the grain in general? What are the benefits and drawbacks of this process? Any insight is appreciated. Great question. So, I love distilling on the grain. Now, for those of you who've never distilled on the grain, this is right up there with, actually making an all-grain mash as opposed to a sugar shine mash. You may not like it for a white liquor, just to be honest with you. You may or may not. It makes a lot richer liquor, a lot bolder liquor, a lot heavier liquor, a lot more oily of a liquor. It is prime stuff to put into a barrel. It's heavy duty. It's what a lot of the old school distillers grew up with and grew up around. You didn't waste anything, so you didn't want that alcohol left behind in your grain, so you put it in the still and you found a way to deal with it as you could to keep it from scorching. Now, that being said, that false bottom on that Vevor, which I really do like, they're a little thin, but they would seem to work pretty well. A few little tricks that I've figured out with the Vevor. So I love that false bottom. I love that that whole top of that Vevor comes off. They're actually not bad stills for the price that they are. In fact, I think for a survivalist, small-scale home distiller that wants a kick-around still, especially for agricultural processes, if you're growing a garden, you got a little excess, you need a good, cheap stripping still. Same way that a commercial distiller would look at it. Let's buy a good, cheap stainless stripping still that we can get through a lot of product with as quickly as what we possibly can. If it gets beat up a little bit, it gets beat up a little bit. That is the Vevor to a T. And then you can, of course, modify it however you'd like to. And, Wayne from Ozark Stillworks can certainly make those reducers for you that you need for that, etc. But without going into all that technicality. So the thing that I figured out with the Vevor and that false bottom is make sure you reinforce that false bottom. Because if you don't, and you go to put a grain bag in there on that false bottom, and you're distilling along, etc., and that bottom gets to rocking pretty good because you're hitting it with a lot of flame, trying to get it up and rolling, it'll tilt, and it'll drop your bag down on the bottom, and you'll scorch, right? That's something that you don't want. I have had that happen before. The way around that is to do what I always did with my little 8-gallon copper still that was designed like the Vevor where the whole top came off. I simply take mason jars and put those up underneath that false bottom, enough to cover the bottom of the still itself so it can't tilt, it can't go anywhere. Now, the other part of this is, you could probably get away with using the false bottom as is if you didn't put all the solids in there. If you were just using a very small grain bag to get some amount of the flavor out of the grain, you could probably get away with using the false bottom as is. But with all the grain, or all the peaches, or all the apples, or whatever you're doing, certainly reinforce that false bottom. The other part of this is, if you're going to run all that grain in there, you're going to end up with some lees in there as well, right? Some solids, some yeast cake that's going to probably try to fall to the bottom and try to scorch. So what I would do is I would also leave that still top off until you're getting pretty close to boiling, and just get you something, long-handled spoon or whatever you got, paddle, it doesn't matter, and stir that thing every 5 minutes just to keep all those solids from that lees up off the bottom. Otherwise, what will happen, even with the false bottom and even with the jars, is some of those leaves will fall. They'll go up underneath those jars. Those jars will hold it down just enough that it will scorch. So it can be done. You can do it with these Vevor football stills, Lombardi stills. It does make a good, heavy-bodied quality product to go into a cask, but you got to take some precautions. So bear all those things in mind. Anyways, guys, as always, keep the questions coming. Love to hear from you. Keep your eye out on this channel and thealchemistcabinet.com for the upcoming 2025 Distiller's Almanac, which I am damn near finished with, thankfully. I actually have some contributing articles again from some other guests, including Distiller Woody, Wayne from Ozark Stillworks, Christopher Conrad from Bad Motivator. Got a couple other guys I'm going to reach out to. That thing should be out, I hope, sometime in October and or November, so that you have it in plenty of time for the beginning of the quote-unquote new year, as it were. And if you're out and about in Indiana, I will be speaking tomorrow evening at the Candlelight Tour at Springmill State Park at the old Daisy Spring Mill Distillery, where you can hear all about the history of distilling in Indiana, as well as the history of that particular distillery. I don't remember what time that starts, but you can look that up on the DNR website here in the state of Indiana and find out when it starts. And I hope to see some of y'all there. All right, love y'all. Later.